You're watching the MMA Oracles Podcast, and now, presenting your host, Jack Moon.
This is the MMA Oracles Podcast, and I am your host, Jack Moon. On this episode, we're going to be diving right into UFC on ESPN 54. First fight of the night is a bantamweight pairing between Angel Pacheco and Calvin the Don Loughran. Pacheco is 32 years old. He is 7-2 overall with 4 knockouts and 3 submissions. He is obviously a finisher, has stopped all of his pro wins. He did earn a contract on the Contender Series, but he did so with a loss. He took an absolute beating against Danny Silva, was able to make it to the final bell, and that was enough to impress Dana White. He spends part-time training at the New England Cartel, so that is a good sign for him that he's got at least part-time a great camp behind him. But he was signed as a punching bag, and his record's not very good. He's only got 7 wins. He beat one fighter twice. So he's only beaten 6 fighters. 3 of them have had losing records. Their total combined record stands at 46-36. with 21 of those wins coming from just 2 fighters. So hasn't faced a really good level of competition and definitely hasn't beaten a very good level of competition either. He will be taking on Loughran, who is 27 years old. He is 8-1 overall with 5 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 1 decision. He is the former Cage Warriors champion. He's got good boxing, pretty decent wrestling too, and he's got a good team behind him at Team Calbon in Liverpool. He lost in his UFC debut, but he was going against a veteran opponent there. He was put into his UFC debut. He had a lot of hype behind him, and he was thrown right in against Taylor Lapilus and ended up dropping a decision. He does have some good wins in his career. He picked up victories over Luke Shanks and Dylan Hazan in Cage Warriors. Those two are decent prospects in their own right. Loughran is coming into this fight as a minus 345 favorite, with Pacheco coming back as a plus 270 underdog. It's currently 1,203 Tapology votes on the fight. 92% of those are favoring Loughran, with 56% picking him to win by knockout. Of the 8% taking Pacheco, 63% are taking him to win by decision. Don't really agree with those fan votes at all. Pacheco's never been finished. We saw him take an absolute beating against Danny Silva. That was at featherweight, so maybe the weight cut does something to his durability and Loughran can put him away, but he looked ridiculously durable in that fight. And he's also never won a decision, so he's a finisher, so it's hard to imagine him winning a decision against a guy like Loughran, who, he's a finisher in his own right, but he has won one decision, so he's the more proven fighter in that regard. Loughran really needs a win here. I think the UFC wants to get him a win here as well. Like I said, he did come in with a lot of hype behind him. He was a former Cage Warriors guy. He's an Irish fighter who talks a lot of trash. Potential star in the making. I think he was humbled a little bit in his UFC debut, getting beat by Lapilus. Lapilus is a very skilled veteran fighter, so really no shame in that loss. I expect Loughran to have made some improvements, especially with the team he's got behind him. I expect him to kind of learn from that loss. And I expect him to really just fight smart here. I think he's going to dominate this fight from bell to bell. Like I said, I think Pacheco is more of a punching bag, really. I haven't really seen anything out of him that makes me think he's a UFC caliber fighter, whereas Loughran definitely has potential going forward. Loughran is the better boxer. I think he'll be able to win the striking exchanges, as we saw in the Contender Series. Pacheco doesn't have very good defense. He just took an absolute beating. I don't know if Loughran will kind of put it on him as bad as Danny Silva did. He's definitely going to throw some more power shots, look to put him away. The only thing that I worry about is maybe Loughran gets overzealous trying to put him away, maybe tires himself out, and Pacheco has an opportunity to come back late. But I just don't see it. Pacheco doesn't look like a UFC caliber fighter to me. So I think even if he does start coming back late, I think Loughran's the better wrestler, and I think he can control the fight that way. So for the official pick, give me Calvin the Don Loughran by unanimous decision. Up next on the card, we jump up to the middleweight division for a pairing between Andre Petroski and Jacob Mamba Malkoun. Petroski is 32 years old. He is 10-2 overall with 4 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 2 decisions. He was a TUF 29 semifinalist. He's currently 5-1 in the UFC. He holds notable wins over Nick Maximov, Wellington Turman, and Gerald Mearshart. And he's completed in grappling matches and has picked up some notable wins there over Phil Haas, Eric Anders, and Vince St. Preux. So even beating some bigger guys there with his grappling. So he is very dangerous on the ground, and he's got a really good team behind him at Renzo Gracie Philly. He will be taking on Malkoun, who is 28. He is 7-3 overall with 2 knockouts and 5 decisions. Malkoun is currently 3-3 in the UFC. His best wins have been over Abdul Razak Al Hassan, Nick Maximov as well. And he has some wins as a pro boxer. So his hands are pretty good. And he does train with Robert Whitaker, which I think is kind of what punched his ticket to the UFC in the first place. Malkoun is sitting as a minus 210 favorite going into this fight, with Petroski coming back as a plus 170 underdog. There's currently 1,261 Tapology votes on the fight. 68% of those are favoring the underdog Petroski, with 71% of those taking him to win by decision. Of the 32% taking Malkoun, 81% are taking him to win by decision. To me, the biggest question mark going into this fight is really what version of Petroski are we going to get? He had, in my opinion, he had showed a little bit of improvement in his cardio. Definitely had a little bit of a setback in that Mearshart fight, even though it did go to decision and he won. He could tell he was tired in the later rounds. We didn't really get to see much of him in his last fight against Michel Pereira. He got knocked out early. So yeah, I think if he shows up smart and prepared to go the 3 full rounds, then I like him to win this fight as an underdog. If he goes out there and tries to put Malkoun away early, he might gas himself out and could end up losing. So it is a bit of a risky pick, but I am favoring Petroski as the underdog here. I do think he does normally start pretty fast, and I think he can win the early rounds. And then the biggest thing that made me, because I've seen a lot of other analysts taking Jacob Malkoun in this fight, and I don't blame them at all. Like I said, I could definitely see Petroski tiring himself out and Malkoun taking over, especially with his own wrestling. But the biggest stat that I saw that kept me on Petroski's side was that Malkoun has a 0% takedown defense in the UFC. Anyone who's tried to take him down has succeeded on every attempt. He didn't even have a takedown defense listed on his on the matchup page for this event. So I went to the UFC stats and I went through all of his fights that he's had in the UFC, and sure enough, he hasn't defended a single takedown. So with Petroski being a really powerful wrestler, I think even if he's tired, with Malkoun's absolutely god-awful takedown defense, I think Petroski will be able to end up gaining top control even when he's tired. So, yeah, I love him as an underdog because of that. Still risky, like I said. It wouldn't necessarily shock me if he gets tired and then Malkoun ends up taking over, but I think Petroski definitely does enough early to win the first round, and I think that terrible takedown defense of Malkoun is going to come back to bite him, as Petroski will be able to get him down at will going throughout the fight. So for the official pick, give me Andre Petroski by unanimous decision. Up next on the card, we have a women's flyweight pairing between Victoria Dudakova and Melissa Gatto. Dudakova is 25 years old. She is 8-0 undefeated with 2 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 2 decisions. She's currently 2-0 in the UFC. Her best wins have been over Estella Nunes in her UFC debut, but Estella Nunes was injured in that fight. And then her win over Jin Yu Fry in her last outing, in which she missed weight, also had a staph infection, didn't look that great, dropped around to a much smaller fighter. And she also beat Maria Silva on the Contender Series, which was an okay win as well. She is moving up to flyweight here after missing weight in her last outing, and I don't think we've seen the best out of her yet. I do think that weight miss and the staph infection did hinder her last performance. She is young and still improving, undefeated. I think we're going to see a better version of her in this fight. She is taking on Gato, who is 28 years old. She is 8-2-2 overall, 2 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 2 decisions as well. She is 2-2 in the UFC currently. Her best wins have come over Carol Rosa, who she beat before joining the UFC, Sijara Eubanks, and currently she is coming off back-to-back losses to Tracy Cortez and Ariane Lipski. Going into the matchup, Gato is a minus 160 favorite, with Dudakova coming back as a plus 135 underdog. There's currently 1,207 Tapology votes on the fight. 82% of those are actually favoring the underdog, Dudakova, with 84% of those taking her to win by decision. Of the 18% taking Gato to win, 69% of those are taking her to win by decision. I do agree with the fan voting there that this fight is most likely going to decision, and I do like an undefeated prospect as an underdog. Gato is coming off back-to-back losses, so she should be coming in highly motivated. Her back is kind of to the wall. She really needs this win. She went to war with Ariane Lipski in her last fight, too, and lost a very close split decision. So she definitely has the tools to win this fight. I just don't know if she'll be able to implement them very well. And like I said, I do think we're going to get an improved version of Dudakova here. I think Dudakova is going to be able to show some new wrinkles in her game, things that we aren't prepared for, things that Gato won't be prepared for. Even without that, I think Dudakova has a good chance of winning. She is the more powerful fighter, it would seem. She's got solid cardio. She is the more accurate fighter, accurate striker. She's good defensively, and she's also the better wrestler. So I think she'll be able to land the more meaningful blows on the feet and wrestle at times to control the fight and just edge the rounds out. So for the official pick, give me Victoria Dudakova by unanimous decision. Up next, we have a rematch between Ibo, the last Ottoman Aslan, taking on Anton, the Pleasure Man Turkali. Aslan is 27 years old. He is 12-1 overall. All 12 of his victories have been by knockout. He earned a contract on the Contender Series with a first-round KO over Paulo Renato Jr. Renato Jr. was pretty good, but Aslan's only ever beaten one other fighter who had a winning record. He was 5-0 before he even fought an opponent who had a single win, and the current combined record of his opponents outside of Paulo Renato Jr. is 55-94. So he's really mostly just beaten bums. So he does also have a loss to Turkali already. We'll get into that a little bit later. Turkali is 27 years old. He is 8-3 overall with 5 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 1 decision. He's currently 0-3 in the UFC. He went 1-0 in the Contender Series where he didn't get a contract. He ended up coming in later on short notice. He did submit Ibo Aslan in their first meeting. It was kind of a fluke win. Ibo was kind of taking it to him, landing a lot of shots. He threw a kick and kind of slipped. Turkali was able to take advantage of that, ended up on his back, and locked up a rear naked choke to end it. So he also beat Ocasio dos Santos by decision on the Contender Series. And in the UFC, he has lost to Jailton Almeida, who's a top-ranked heavyweight currently, Vitor Petrino, who's a top-ranked light heavyweight, and Tyson Pedro, who just retired. So I honestly think Turkali's faced the much better competition throughout their careers. Going into this fight, Aslan is a minus 125 favorite, with Turkali coming back as a plus 105 underdog. It's currently 1,210 Tapology votes on the fight. 83% of those are favoring Aslan, and 85% of those are expecting him to win by knockout. Of the 17% taking Turkali, 51% are taking him to win by submission. I think if this fight goes past the first round, the odds are going to start to turn in Turkaley's favor. Most of Aslan's fights have ended in the first round. Um, Aslan did get submitted in the second round of their last meeting, which is his only loss. He's only gone past the first round twice in his career. Once the loss to Turkaley, and the other was actually probably the best win of his career. It was a third round knockout over Robert Valentin. But Aslan to me is really still unproven. Um, After he lost to Turkaley, he beat three fighters who had negative records, and then he got a bit of a fluke early KO against Paulo Renato Jr. on the Contender Series. So, I mean, I'm just not sold on the guy yet. He has power. It wouldn't shock me if he just put Turkaley away quick, but we've seen outside of that last outing that Turkaley had where he just got knocked out by Tyson Pedro, we have seen him be durable in the past. So I think Turkaley just needs to weather the early storm. I think since he's fought him before and absorbed a lot of shots, he's going to be more prepared, know what Aslan has to bring, and know that he needs to start grappling early and often. So I expect a smarter fight out of Turkaley here, and I expect the same result as their first fight. So I like him as an underdog. For the official pick, go ahead and give me Anton Turkaley by submission in the second round. Up next on the card, we have a pairing between two featherweights as Dennis the Great Buzukia is taking on Connor the Controller Matthews. This is a pretty solid pairing. In the red corner, we have Bazukia, who is 26 years old. He's 11-4 overall with 4 knockouts, 1 submission, and 6 decisions. He's currently 0-2 in the UFC. He did go 1-1 on the Contender Series. He was also 1-0 in Bellator. But he really doesn't have any quality wins. I take a look at his record. A lot of the guys either that he beat were either bums or just guys that just aren't worth mentioning. They're not quality wins. So but he does have a great team behind him, though, at Longo Weidman MMA, and I've definitely seen some potential in him. He's going to be taking on Matthews, who is 31 years old, and he is 7-1 overall with 1 knockout, 5 submissions, and 1 decision. He is also 1-1 on the Contender Series. He did score a good win over Jair Farias in his last outing on Contender. He had previously been training with Lozon MMA and was a dangerous submission guy. But he switched camps. He's training now at the New England Cartel. And in that last outing on Contender Series, he really showed a vastly improved striking game, which I definitely attribute to that new camp. So he's definitely starting to round out his game. And I see this being a close fight, and so do the odds makers. Buzukia is coming in as a minus 125 favorite, with Matthews coming back as a plus 105 underdog. It's currently 1,178 Tapology votes on the fight. 78% are actually taking the underdog Matthews. Of those 78%, 76% are taking him to win by decision. Of the 22% taking Buzukia, 70% are taking him to win by decision. At first glance in this fight, I was favoring Buzukia. He's had some hype behind him for a while now. He fought his pro debut in Bellator. His 6th pro fight was on the Contender Series. But to me, he just hasn't proved that he's worth the hype still. Like I said, he's beaten a lot of guys that are either bums or just not quality opponents. On the other side, I did like Matthews going into his first Contender Series fight. He came up short against Francis Marshall, who's kind of turned out to be a bit of a bust himself. So that does kind of have some doubt creep in about my opinion towards Matthews. I definitely kind of doubted him a little bit going into his second outing, but like I said, he showed a greatly improved striking game. I think he looks a lot more well put together now. He's an aggressive fighter. He will chase those takedowns. He's got good submissions. Definitely had some good jiu-jitsu coming from Lozon MMA. And now he's definitely got a lot better striking training with the New England Cartel. So a lot more put together game that I've seen from him. And like I mentioned, he's a very aggressive fighter, and I think that's going to help him in this fight a lot. Buzukia we've seen him lose decisions and we've seen him let fights kind of slip away. And I think Matthews is going to be able to exploit that, especially if he is able to get his wrestling going. I think he would have an advantage on the floor, even though Bazookia trains with a very grappling oriented team at Longo Weidman. I don't think Matthews would just overwhelm him on the mat, and I don't think he would get a submission, but I think he could control him there. With his striking, I think he's going to be competitive on the feet as well, and I think that he'll be the one throwing more volume. I think he'll be the one coming forward. So I like him to edge out the rounds. For the official pick, give me Connor Matthews by unanimous decision. For the next fight on the card, this was one of the easiest fights for me to pick, as Julio Arce is taking on Herbert the Blaze Burns. Arce is 34 years old. He is 18-6 overall with 5 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 8 decisions. He's currently 5-4 in the UFC. His best wins have been over Dan Ige, Julian Erosa, Daniel Santos, and he's got a great team behind him at Tiger Schulman's Mixed Martial Arts. On the blue corner, we have Burns, who is 36 years old. He is 11-4 overall with 1 knockout, 8 submissions, and 2 decisions. He is currently 2-2 in the UFC. He went 5-2 in one fighting championship, and he went 1-0 in the Contender Series. His best wins have been over Timofey Nastyukhin, Derek Minner, Nate Landwehr, and Evan Dunham. Going into this fight, Arce is a pretty big favorite at minus 455, with Burns coming back as a plus 350 underdog. It's currently 1,230 Tapology votes on the fight. 86% of those are favoring Arce, of which 48% are taking him to win by decision. Of the 14% taking Burns, 42% are taking him to win by submission. Both fighters are coming off pretty long layoffs here, almost a year and a half for each guy. Burns was longer. I think his is over a year and a half. He's also coming off a pair of knockout losses, whereas I think Arce is only coming off a decision loss. From what I've seen, Burns is dangerous early. If he can get this fight to the floor, he may have an advantage there and probably could get a submission. But Arce is hard to get down. He's only ever been submitted once in his career, and it was by Brian Kelleher in the 3rd round. And from what I've seen, Burns kind of fades in fights, and Arce is a guy who will stick around. I think the longer the fight goes, it's going to start to favor Arce more. And Arce's only ever been finished one other time. It was by knockout, and it was by Yadong Song, which Song's a much better striker, and he's much faster than Burns too. So Arce is going to have the advantage on the feet, and I don't see Burns being able to get it to the floor for any meaningful amount of time. I think Burns will try to do so early and sort of gas himself out, and Arce is just going to take over, and I think he'll put him away. So for the official pick, give me Julio Arce by knockout in the 2nd round. Up next on the card, we have a women's strawweight pairing, which is probably the worst fight on the card, between Verna Jandiroba and Lupita Godinez. In the red corner, Jandiroba is 35 years old. She is 19-3 overall with 1 TKO, 13 submissions, and 5 decisions. She's currently 5-3 in the UFC. She also went 3-0 in Invicta, and the best wins of her career have come over Mizuki Ino, Janaisa Morandin, Felice Herrig, Kanako Murata, Angela Hill, and Marina Rodriguez. On the other side, Godinez is 30 years old. She is 12-3 overall with 3 submissions and 9 decisions. She is currently 7-3 in the UFC. She also went 1-0 in LFA. Best wins of her career have come over Vanessa Demopoulos, Loma Lookboonmee, Ariana Carnelosi, Cynthia Calvillo, Emily Ducote, Tabitha Ricci, and she's got a really good team behind her at Lobo Gym with Alexa Grasso, Irene Aldana, and Diego Lopes. So some high-level female training partners there as well. So that is a good benefit for her. She's also coming into this fight as a minus 200 favorite, with Jandiroba coming back as a plus 165 underdog. There's currently 1,293 Tapology votes on the card. On this fight. 76% of those are favoring Godinez. Of those 76%, 85% are taking her to win by decision. Of the 24% taking Jandiroba, 85% are all taking her to win by decision. I am expecting this fight to go to decision as well. I think it's going to be a pretty lackluster fight. I think if there is a finish, it will most likely favor Jandiroba. I wouldn't consider her a bad underdog choice here, but it's not the direction I'm leaning. Godinez is kind of unreliable, so I wouldn't be shocked if she loses this fight. I don't like her as a minus 200 favorite at all. We've seen her just kind of show up flat in some of her fights, so Jandiroba is no joke either. She is, she's top ranked for a reason. She's beaten some very high level fighters. But I just expect Godinez to outwork her in this fight. She throws a lot of volume. She's always there for a scrap. She sets a high pace. I think that's going to help her edge out the rounds. I think bigger moments could go to Jandiroba if, like I said, if there is a finish. If she can get her grappling going, she definitely could lock up a submission on Godinez. But I'm going to say Godinez leads the dance in this one and just comes out ahead on points. So for the official pick, give me Lupita Godinez by unanimous decision. Next up, we head to the featherweight division for a pairing between Nate the Train Landwehr and Jamal Pretty Boy Emmers. Landwehr is 35 years old. He is 17-5 overall with 8 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 7 decisions. He is currently 4-3 in the UFC. He also went 5-0 in M1 Global, where he was the former champion there. Best wins of his career have been over Victor Kolznik, who he beat twice, Darren Elkins, Ludovic Klein, David Onama, and Austin Lingo. And he has a great team behind him at MMA Masters, so should be coming into this one well prepared. On the other side, Emmers is 34 years old. He is 20-7 overall with 8 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 9 decisions. He is currently 3-3 in the UFC. He's 3-0 in LFA, and he went 0-1 on the Contender Series. Best wins of his career have come over Alexander Hernandez, Corey Sandhagen, Jay Cuccinello, Hussein Askabov, and Dennis Buzukia. Emmers is coming into this fight as a minus 205 favorite, which actually somewhat surprises me, and Landwehr is coming back as a plus 170 underdog. There's currently 1,136 Tapology votes on the fight. 66% of those are favoring Landwehr. Of those, 69% are taking him to win by decision. Of the 34% taking Emmers, 71% are taking him to win by decision. I think Landwehr is a popular fighter, and I think that's kind of swaying the fan voting there in his favor. I think he's come through a good amount of times as an underdog as well, so definitely think that's helping the fan voting there as well. Looking at the matchup, though, I don't necessarily like it for him. Emmers has the reach advantage. He is the more technical striker. He's the more accurate striker. He's better defensively. And he's also got the tools to edge out the wrestling and the grappling. So it's going to be a tough fight for Landwehr. Landwehr does kind of excel in that sort of situation. Like I said, he's come through as the underdog multiple times. He's also a fighter that likes to make it ugly and make it a scrap. And I don't think that's somewhere where Emmers really excels. So I expect it to be pretty close. But like I said, I think Emmers is just the more efficient fighter. I think he'll be able to use his reach. He'll be able to use his accuracy. He's going to defend better. I think, Landwehr is probably going to take more shots. And I think that will edge it out in Emmers' favor. So for the official pick, give me Jamal Emmers by unanimous decision. We jump up to the welterweight division for the next outing as Chitty Bang Bang Njokuani is taking on Reese Skeletor McKee. Njokuani is 35 years old. He is 22-10 overall with 14 knockouts, 1 submission, and 7 decisions. He's He's currently 2-3 in the UFC. He went 5-3 in Bellator, and he was 1-0 in LFA and 1-0 on the Contender Series as well. Best wins of his career have come over Alan Jouban, Gilbert Smith, Max Griffin, Andre Fialho, Melvin Gillard, Mario Souza, Marc-Andre Barrio, and Dusko Todorovic. He is moving back down to welterweight in this fight, and that does worry me a bit. But we'll get into that in a little bit. He is taking on Reese McKee, who is 28 years old. He is 13-5-1 overall with 10 knockouts and 3 submissions. The guy is a finisher, has finished all of his wins there, but he's currently 0-3 in the UFC. He did go 6-2-1 in Bama, and he's 6-0 in Cage Warriors. Best wins of his career have been over Jai Herbert, Justin Burlinson, and Jim Wallhead. Going into this fight, Njokuani is a minus 160 favorite, with McKee coming back as a plus 130 underdog. There's currently 1,247 Tapology votes on the fight. 67% of those are favoring Njokuani. 80% of those are taking him to win by knockout. Of the 33% taking McKee, 60% of those are taking him to win by knockout. I'm actually surprised that this betting line isn't wider and the fan voting isn't wider. McKee is not a UFC caliber fighter. The guy has beaten a bunch of bums in CWFC and Bama. His best wins have been over Jai Herbert, who's been a low-end guy in the UFC, who's struggling to stay on the roster. Even if he is still on the roster, he may have been cut by this point. Justin Burlinson, who failed to make it to the UFC. It's a guy who lost on the Contender Series, I think, twice at this point. And Jim Wallhead, who's old and also washed out of the UFC. If you look, I think Jim Wallhead, I don't even know if he got a UFC win during his time there. And like I said, he's an old veteran at this point, kind of on the decline at the tail end of his career. Njokuani's 35. So there's definitely concern, especially with him being 6'3" and deciding to cut back down to welterweight at this point in his career. It's not a great look. I am worried about that weight cut. We'll have to see how he comes in on Friday, but yeah, I mean, I feel like he could come in, miss weight, still come out here and dominate this fight. Njokuani's always good early on in the fight, and McKee just has awful defense. He's a guy that he's a striker, but he's just going to walk at you and he'll take shots. His defense is terrible, and against a guy like Njokuani, that is a recipe for disaster. I think if Njokuani can't put him away early, I mean, McKee has shown that he can be durable at times. There's a worry that McKee can take over the longer the fight goes. We've seen Njokuani kind of fade, and cutting back down to welterweight's definitely not going to help that. But I just can't imagine McKee getting past the first round even. I think Njokuani is the much better technical striker, and he's super powerful. So I think he's going to put him away. For the official pick, give me Chidi Njokuani by knockout in the first round. Drop back down to the featherweight division for this next outing between Bill Senor Perfecto Algeo and Kyle the Monster Nelson. Algeo is 34 years old. He is 18-7 overall with 4 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 7 decisions. He is currently 5-3 in the UFC. He was 1-0 in World Series of Fighting, but he went 0-1 on the Contender Series. Best wins of his career have come over Spike Carlisle, Joe Anderson Brito, Herbert Burns, TJ Brown, and Alexander Hernandez. He is taking on Nelson, who is 32 years old. He is 15-5-1 overall with 5 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 6 decisions. He is currently 3-4-1 in the UFC. Best wins of his career have come over Jonathan Brookins, Kama Worthy, Polo Reyes, Blake Builder, and Fernando Padilla. Algeo is currently a minus 220 favorite, with Nelson coming back as a plus 180 underdog. There's currently 1,199 Tapology votes on the fight. 88% of those are favoring Algeo, with 81% taking him to win by decision. Of the 12% taking Nelson, 70% are taking him to win by decision. I do see this fight going to decision as well. I'm really not excited about it. I'm not a fan of either guy, and I don't see either one of them have a ton of potential going forward. So this is kind of a waste of a fight to me. I mean, Nelson's 32. He's kind of in his prime, but he's been pretty terrible in the UFC. He's 3-4-1. And Algio's a guy I've never really liked, and he's 34, so he's kind of getting out of his prime there, heading towards the back end of his career. And he's a guy that like I said, I've never really been a fan of. I didn't think he belonged in the UFC. He lost to Brandon Loughnane on the Contender Series, and I've been kind of bitter since Loughnane didn't get the contract, and then Algio ended up with the contract a little bit afterwards. I think Nelson has, he's coming off 2 wins. Those last 2 outings, he was able to exploit some holes in less complete fighters, and he was able to draw them into fighting his type of fight. I don't see Algio doing that. Algio has, I think he has his own gym where he's a coach as well, so I think he would be more prepared for that. He's also a fighter that throws more volume. He's the more accurate striker. And he's also the better offensive wrestler and better grappler. So I just see Algio controlling pace in this fight, and kind of point fighting and taking the rounds. So for the official pick, give me Bill Algio by unanimous decision. Head to the middleweight division for this next pairing between Nursultan Black Ruzaboev taking on Cedriques the Reaper Dumas. Ruzaboev is 30 years old. He is 33-8-2 overall with 11 knockouts, 20 submissions, and 2 decisions. He's currently 1-0 in the UFC. He's got a great team behind him at Renzo Gracie Philly, and the best win of his career has been that UFC victory over Bruno Ferreira. He's got a lot of experience, but he really hasn't faced much good competition. There's no one else I would really even mention on his record as someone that's good that he beat. So even though he's got all those fights, he is slightly overrated in my opinion. He will be taking on Dumas, who is 28 years old. He is 9-1 overall with 4 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 3 decisions. He is currently 2-1 in the UFC. He went 1-0 in the Contender Series. Best wins of his career were over Matej Panaz on the Contender Series, and then his 2 UFC wins over Cody Brundage and Abu Izatar. Going into this fight, Ruzaboev is a minus 270 favorite, with Dumas coming back as a plus 220 underdog. There's currently 1,273 Tapology votes on the fight. 93% of those are favoring Ruzaboev. 62% of those are taking him to win by submission. Of the 7% taking Dumas, 54% of those are taking him to win by decision. Dumas's camp, if you look at the camp that he trains with, they produce just a lot of mediocre fighters. Their top guys are Kurt Hollabaugh, who we just saw lose to Trey Ogden, Brock Weaver, who was cut from the UFC, and Cedriques Dumas himself. So not a great team there. I definitely see potential in him. I would like to see him kind of go somewhere else. He's younger, he's big, he's dangerous. But I mean, Ruzaboev has faced that kind of thing before, and he's also bigger and a little more dangerous kind of everywhere. The fact that Ruzaboev has mostly faced bums, that does worry me a little bit. But he's so big for this division. He's got good awareness as well, good fight IQ, and he should have a decent advantage on the floor, and I do expect him to press that early. Dumas, I don't think has the best fight IQ. I don't think he has the best IQ out of the cage either. He's had multiple run-ins with the law. He's coming off a recent arrest as well, so I don't know how his mental state's going to be going into this. But yeah, I think Ruzaboev definitely has a better team behind him. Should be well prepared to exploit the IQ, exploit the weaknesses of Dumas. So expect him to get it to the floor early and lock up a submission. So for the official pick, give me Nursultan Ruzaboev by submission in the first round. Staying in that middleweight division, we have another matchup here as Chris All-American Weidman is taking on Bruno Blindado Silva. Weidman is 39 years old. He is 15-7 overall with 6 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 5 decisions. He is the former UFC middleweight champion. He is 11-7 in the UFC with his best wins coming over Uriah Hall, Valdir Araujo, Alessio Sakara, Damian Maia, Mark Munoz, Anderson Silva twice, Lyoto Machida, Vitor Belfort, Kelvin Gastelum, and Omari Akhmadov. He did return. He broke his leg against Uriah Hall in their second fight, and he did return from that in his last outing, and he just took a ton of leg kicks from Brad Tavares. Didn't really look that good in that fight. He hasn't won a fight since 2020. He does have a great team behind him at Serra Jiu-Jitsu, so he's going to be as prepared as he can be. He's going to be taking on Silva, who is 34. He is 23-10 overall with 20 knockouts and 3 decisions. Silva is currently 4-4 in the UFC with his best wins of his career coming over Alexander Shlemenko, Artem Frolov, Wellington Turman, Andrew Sanchez, Jordan Wright, and Brad Tavares. This guy's beaten good competition outside the UFC. Not a lot worth mentioning besides Shlemenko and Frolov, but definitely not bums either. There's a lot of other guys that he beat that are decent fighters. So even though he's 4-4 in the UFC, he is a good fighter, and he's got a good team behind him as well at Evolution Thai MMA. Silva's coming into this fight as a minus 280 favorite, with Weidman coming back as a plus 225 underdog. It's currently 1,344 Tapology votes. 88% are taking Silva. Of those, 75% are taking him to win by knockout. Of the 12% taking Weidman, 68% are taking him to win by decision. Weidman has stated that he contemplated retirement. I really think he should have taken it. Silva isn't really the leg kick threat that a guy like Tavares is, but he's got much more knockout power. Weidman is slow. He was never a fast fighter, and being 39, he's definitely slower. He's a plodding guy. Really, this isn't the worst matchup for him. I mean, if Weidman can get the takedown, he'll have a huge advantage on the mat, and he could likely end up submitting Bruno Silva. I mean, Bruno Silva's ground game has been bad. He's been submitted in a lot of his losses, but he has pretty solid takedown defense. It's sitting at 73% in the UFC. He's also a fighter that starts quick. He's fast, and he's got, like I said, he's got brutal knockout power. So I expect him to start doing damage to Weidman early and often. And Weidman historically hasn't been a very durable guy. We've seen him take a lot of knockouts towards the tail end of his career. So if he can get past the first round and start to use his wrestling, I think he's got a path to victory. But I don't think Silva's ever going to let him get there. I think he's going to come out, start doing damage early, and I don't think Weidman is going to be able to hold up. So for the official pick, give me Bruno Silva by knockout in the first round. In the co-main event of the evening, we jump to the welterweight division for a matchup between Vicente, the Silent Assassin Luque, taking on Joaquin Numansa Buckley. Luque is 32 years old. He is 22-9-1 overall with 11 knockouts, 8 submissions, and 3 decisions. He is currently 15-5 in the UFC. Best wins of his career have come over Thiago Santos, Bilal Muhammad, Nico Price twice, Chad Lepre, Jalen Turner, Brian Barberena, Mike Perry, Randy Brown, Tyron Woodley, Michael Chiesa, and Rafael Dos Anjos. He is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a black belt in Luta Livre, and he splits times between two good teams at Cerrado MMA and Killcliff FC. He is taking on Buckley, who is 29 years old. He is 17-6 overall with 12 knockouts and 5 decisions. Buckley is currently 7-4 in the UFC. He also went 3-2 in Bellator and 2-0 in LFA. Best wins of his career have been that highlight reel knockout over Impa Kasangane, Jordan Wright, Abdul Razak Al Hassan, Albert Duraev, Andre Fialho, and Alex Morono. Luque is currently sitting at a minus 115 slight favorite, with Buckley coming back as a minus 105 near even underdog. So there's currently 1,273 Tapology votes on the fight. 72% of those are favoring Luque, with 39% taking him to win by decision. Of the 28% taking Buckley, 66% are taking him to win by knockout. I'm honestly not sure why those odds are so close. There's been a little bit of worry about Luque's durability after his loss to Jeff Neal, but I'm really not that worried about it. He rebounded with a nice win over Dos Anjos, and Buckley has really never been able to break out of the pack. He's been a guy that's really only beaten mediocre guys. He's still 29, so there's still time for him, but it's not like Luque's 32. He's right in his prime, so he's been historically durable as well. I see Luque being able to win a striking battle, even though Buckley is dangerous in that area. And I think if Luque can get him to the floor, he's going to have a massive advantage. So Buckley's explosive. He's very quick, and he's going to be dangerous early. But I think Luque is going to kind of draw him into a brawl and start to wear him down, and that explosion is going to start to go away. And once Buckley slows down, Luque is just going to put it on him. I expect him to hurt Buckley on the feet. Buckley also has durability issues from what we've seen. He could potentially follow that up with a submission, but I think he just hurts Buckley, follows him up with more strikes, and pounds out a win. So for the official pick in the co-main event, give me Vicente Luque by knockout in the second round. It's time for the main event of the evening here, as Erin Cold-Blooded Blanchfield is taking on Manon, the Beast Fiorot, in a number one contender fight for this division. Blanchfield is 24 years old. She is 12-1 overall with 2 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 6 decisions. She is currently 6-0 in the UFC, and she went 4-1 in Invicta. Best wins of her career have been over Kay Hansen, Brogan Walker, Miranda Maverick, JJ Aldrich, Molly McCann, Jessica Andrade, and Tyla Santos. On the other side, Fiorot is 34 years old. She is 11-1 overall with 6 knockouts and 5 decisions. She is also 6-0 in the UFC. She also went 3-0 in UAE Warriors. Best wins of her career have come over Tabitha Ricci, Mayra Bueno Silva, Jennifer Meyer, Katlyn Sermonara, and Rose Namajunas. Going into this fight, Blanchfield is the minus 200 favorite, with Fiorot coming back as a plus 165 underdog. There's currently 1,383 Tapology votes on the fight. 80% of those are favoring Blanchfield, with 53% of those taking her to win by decision. Of the 20% taking Fiorot, 72% are taking her to win by decision. It seems likely that this fight's probably going to decision. I do think Blanchfield's being a little bit overhyped. Her best wins have been over Miranda Maverick, who has a 40% takedown defense rate, JJ Aldrich, who's kind of mid-level, not a very dangerous fighter either, Molly McCann, who has no ground game whatsoever. Watched her put herself into an armbar against Julija Stoliarenko. Jessica Andrade, who has been submitted in a third of her losses and historically has pretty bad takedown defense as well. And Tyla Santos, who went 4-3 in the UFC and got cut. So I do think Blanchfield is good, but I don't know if I'm buying the hype behind her right now, especially not as a minus 200 against a fighter like Fiorot. Fiorot's beat Ricci, who's a solid young prospect in her own right. She beat Mayra Bueno Silva, who's kind of an awful title contender. Jennifer Maia, though, who was a crafty veteran, very good fighter there. Katlyn Sermonara, also a crafty vet, former title challenger. Not an easy fight for a lot of fighters. And Rose Namajunas, the former champ, who showed that she still got it. She just came back and won in the main event last week against Amanda Ribas. So that was a solid win for Fiorot. I think Fiorot is obviously the better striker. She hits a lot harder. She's only been taken out in the UFC once and gave up a minute 16 of control time, and that was against Jennifer Maia. Looking into this a little more, Blanchfield, she's only succeeds on 36% of her takedowns, and I think if she can't get Fiorot to the ground, it's going to be a long night for her. Fiorot has a good takedown defense. She's also got good footwork where she stays on the outside, and she can really punish fighters on the feet as well. Like I said, she's got good power. So if Blanchfield is stuck in these striking exchanges and not able to grapple with her, it's going to be a long night for her. I'm really liking Fiorot as an underdog because of that. I've seen Fiorot fight with a tenacity, and I think she's going to edge out the rounds with her damage and aggression. I think even if Blanchfield is able to shoot some takedowns, I think Fiorot is going to be able to stop him, or even possibly work her way back to her feet. So definitely liking the underdog in the main event here. Give me Manon Fiorot by unanimous decision for the official pick. This has been the MMA Oracles Podcast, and I have been your host, Jack Moon. As always, I appreciate you so much for listening. You can find me at the MMA Oracles pretty much everywhere. Be sure to check out my website, themmaoracles.wordpress.com, for my detailed written breakdowns of all the fights, as well as my rankings for every division in the UFC. Let's jump straight into some of my locks for this card. Locks, I have Calvin Loughran. Don't see Angel Pacheco as being a UFC caliber guy. He looked like a punching bag on the Contender Series, and I expect Calvin Loughran to treat him as such. Julio Arce. Herbert Burns is an aging guy who's coming off multiple knockouts and a long layoff. I think Julio Arce is going to be able to take it to him, wear him out, and get a late finish. Chidi Njokuani also fighting another guy who I don't think is a UFC caliber fighter. Reese McKee's 0-3 in the UFC. Guy has terrible defense, and he's going to walk straight into those power shots from Chidi Njokuani. And Nursultan Uzaboev, there is a little bit of worry there about his past opponents, but he looked really good against Bruno Ferreira, who is a very solid fighter. And like I mentioned with Cedriquez Dumas in my prediction there, the guy's facing some legal troubles. He trains with a team that's, really only produces mediocre guys. So I think Huzaboev should be able to get it done. For my parlay, I am throwing three of those guys. I'm taking Calvin Loughran, Chidi Njokuani, and Huzaboev at plus 194 odds. For my underdogs for the card, I have a lot of them actually. Petrosky, I like him as an underdog at that price that he's at. Definitely feeling that pick. Like I said, Malkoun hasn't defended a single takedown in the UFC, so I think even if Petrosky gets tired, he'll still be able to pull out that victory with his wrestling and grappling. I like Victoria Dudikova, undefeated prospect, moving up. Don't think we've seen the best from her. I think she could pull that off as an underdog. I like Anton Turkalj as an underdog. He's beaten Ibo Aslan before, even though it looked like a bit of a fluke. He's definitely still the more proven guy. Ibo Aslan's beaten only fighters with losing records pretty much. So I like Anton Turkalj to do it again and pull off the submission win over Ibo Aslan again. Connor Matthews was actually kind of surprised that he even is an underdog. That's a really close fight. I'm not sure I'm going to be betting on that one, but definitely like him as an underdog there. And then in the main event, Manon Fiorot. I love her as an underdog. I think Erin Blanchfield is being a little bit overhyped. Her wrestling, they're making her out to be like the female Habib. That's definitely a title that Tatiana Suarez handles right now, not Erin Blanchfield. She only succeeds on 36% of her takedowns. Manon Fiorot is the much better striker, has solid takedown defense. Think she'll be able to edge it out. Those are my picks for the card. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow, and I will see you on the next one.